Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday on a bit of a rainy Monday down here in Niagara. Hope you're all doing well. I'd like to welcome you all to the latest in our series of 2022 CCOVI lecture series events here. My name is Dan Dakin, and I'll be your moderator and your host once again today. Our lecture today will run a little under an hour, and then we'll have a question and answer period. And so please feel free to type in your questions as the presentation is taking place. You can do so in the chat window here, and I'll read the questions at the end. Today I'm really excited to welcome Joachim Scholz and Jacob Gigliotti as our speakers. A quick bio of both of them. So Joachim Scholz is a marketing professor in the Goodman School of Business who has researched and taught social media marketing since 2011 and AR/XR marketing since 2014. In 2020, Scholz launched the world's first dedicated AR marketing courses for MBA and undergraduate business students. Scholz is a research fellow with Brock's Cool Climate, Enology, and Viticulture Institute, an advisory board member at York University's Future of Marketing Institute, and a member of Adweek's Academic Council. He frequently publishes in academic and industry publications and has presented his research and insights at over 30 international conferences and industry events. Jacob Gigliotti, who's also joining us here today, is an enology and viticulture student right here at Brock, who brings with him a wealth of knowledge with 9 years experience working in the wine industry. He's had a taste of virtually all aspects of the industry, including winemaking, viticulture, sales, hospitality, and of course, marketing. Gigliotti did his undergrad thesis in wine marketing, which has recently been accepted at a major academic conference. He's passionate about all things wine, which led him to get his WSET Level 3 award in wines and become a wine communicator on Instagram. And he is at @thewine_whiz. So there's someone new to follow for you on social media. So today, Joachim and Jacob are going to share a lecture titled Brand Storytelling on Instagram, How Wine Brands Create Epic Stories One Image at a Time. So with that, I will pass it over to the two of you who will go ahead and share your screen and please enjoy.
Thank you for this great introduction, Dan, and welcome everybody. My name is Joachim Scholz, and in a little while you will also hear from Jacob. What we're presenting you today is based on Jacob's thesis research at Brock University. We've worked on this for over a year, very collaboratively, and as Dan mentioned, we are now accepted at one of our major conferences. So I think that kind of signals like the ideas we're showing you today here, they're very deep and very innovative. And the way we kind of started our journey was we kind of noticed a problem. And the problem is that brand storytelling is pretty much like one of the most important ideas of marketing. Actually, if you stay on that earlier slide, please, just a moment longer. Brand storytelling is one of the most important ideas in marketing, and Instagram is one of the most important marketing channels, maybe the most important marketing channel for your brand. Now, the problem is that those two things don't fit well together, and I explained to you throughout the presentation why. And we looked for a solution, and the solution we found in character archetypes, and this is where the handout comes in. So I encourage you actually, while we're going through this presentation, to go on epicbrandstorytelling.com, where you can download a massive handout. It's over 40 pages long. It describes in great detail the 12 different character archetypes that are available to your brand and also how to implement them in your own Instagram marketing. So again, like while we're doing this, please go on epicbrandstorytelling.com, and if you have any questions later on about like how this framework applies to your own brand, feel free to reach out to us at info@epicbrandstorytelling.com. But let's dive in here and let's talk a little bit about this brand storytelling. As you can see on the next slide, brand storytelling is kind of not only one of the most important marketing ideas, but it's also central to our civilization. Like since the beginning of time, we told stories. And marketers love storytelling because like the story format helps consumers to better remember and process information about the brand. But more than that, storytelling is actually a key way how consumers make sense of their lives. of the world around us. Like we tell stories to others and to ourselves to make sense of our own lives in this world we all share. And if you look then into stories and the storytelling structure on the next slide here, we see that stories typically have like a very common structure. They have in the beginning, a middle, and an end. They start with some exposition, there's a climax, and then it kind of ebbs down again into some form of resolution. That's storytelling. And then in a nutshell, Instagram, I don't have to explain to you how important Instagram is to your brands. You already know that. Instagram is like one of the dominant social media platforms. It has a lot of different features. Like, for example, there's the Instagram story feature. You can do videos, of course. But if you look at this, and we brought like a slide to show this to you, some data, like most of the data that brands post on Instagram, they're actually image-based. And this is where the problem comes in, right? So if you look into that chart here on the right side, the black bars, that's about 2/3 of the content, around 67%. That's a single image. And then 15% or so, or 15 to 20% is like a carousel where you have to swipe through. So if you kind of take those together, that's about 85% of content that is image-based. So the large majority, which makes sense, right? Because images are a lot quicker, easier, and cheaper to produce than videos. Now, what does the literature tell us? If you looked around and you ask people, like, what makes for a good image to tell my brand story? Well, the advice is not really great. So we brought a couple of quotes. People say it should be simple in some way. It should be in some way great. It should be remarkable. It should be awesome stuff. It should provide value to consumers. It should be compelling and relevant. I don't know about you, but that doesn't really help me a lot to really decide what image makes for great, awesome, compelling content on my Instagram feed. And just to demonstrate to you this point, we brought a little quiz into this presentation. And here I want to give it over to Jacob to lead you through that quiz of what makes for compelling and successful content.
Awesome. Thanks, Yo. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. So here are some images that we took from some of the wine brand Instagram accounts that we looked at. And I wanted to ask you, just kind of internalize, which of these pictures do you think would be great content? So I'll give you just a couple moments, and then I'm going to sort of reveal the answers. So first, let's start with picture A. In picture A, we see this really cool helicopter and this beautiful vineyard. Obviously, it's a very cool image. And so you would think that this would be good content, but in fact, it isn't. At least not for this brand. This specific brand, as you'll see later in the presentation, this doesn't really suit their brand story. The helicopter is actually sort of an outlier in terms of what symbols would best represent their brand. Now in image B, we see a dog inside of a tank. This one can go two ways. If you're like me and you like dogs, then this would be pretty cool. It's a very cute dog. But on the other hand, the dog is inside a wine tank. This is where like wine that you're going to drink is going into. And so some people might not want a dog in there. But regardless of what you think, this is good content, specifically because it does suit this brand story. And they have a very strong connection to nature, which this dog then represents really well. And you'll see that later in the presentation as well. In image number C, we see it's kind of an unassuming image, beautiful landscape, but doesn't really seem like there's that much going on. But this also is a great content, especially for this brand. This is actually the same brand as the dog image you see there. So the birds there actually do align with their brand story. And we have a really great quote about this picture coming up in a little bit. Now, my favorite is D. We have a beautiful McLaren supercar with the door popped open. Obviously a very cool image just for the car that's in it, but is it good content for the brand? Not really. In this case, it actually takes away a little bit from this brand story. as we'll go through in a little bit. And so all this really does make us ask the question, what does make for successful content? So to answer this, we're going to have to ask two other questions. The first is how to make a brand story consumable without sequential plot lines, as we have in the case of an image. And then how can managers select single image content to cohesively tell their brand stories? And so I'll hand it over to Yo to answer the first of these questions.
Thanks, Jacob. That is the core of the problem here, right? So like we have the elements of a story, which we define in our literature as plot, characters, climax, and outcome. And if we're really honest about this, I mean, climax and outcome, that's part of the plot, right? So you see the centrality of the plot in storytelling. And then put this together on the next slide with how we what kind of content is produced on Instagram. You see that we have a sequential plot lines with a beginning, middle, and end. And it's just very, very hard to express a beginning, middle, and end, like a temporal sequence in a single image. And that is the key problem. Storytelling is great for marketing. It just doesn't work well with a single image if we don't change the way how we think about storytelling. And that's why of these four elements of a story, we focus on the next slide on characters, because characters are the only elements in storytelling that do not need or require like a temporal structure. Like you can look at a picture of an old man in a gray robe and a gray pointy hat, and you kind of get the idea that this guy looks like a wizard or a magician, like it's Gandalf. And just by looking at that still image, you kind of get a really, really good idea who that person is. We don't need a sequential plot for that. That's why we're focusing on characters. And that's our little trick we kind of do here. We're going to do like a really reconceptualizing what storytelling is all about. On the next slide, we contrast two different types of storytelling that have been used in the academic literature. The first one you are very familiar with. That's kind of the storytelling that is most often used in marketing. That is brand storytelling. And here, the brand tells its own stories to consumers. The brand acts as the protagonist. And if you think about like how you tell or how you engage in brand storytelling, that's probably that resonates with you, right? So you're telling maybe the story about how your brand was founded, or you're telling a story about like what type of wine you're making and stuff like this. That is really difficult to express on Instagram, again, because of images are the most dominant type of content. To solve for that, we recommend to think of storytelling more in terms of consumer storytelling. So in consumer storytelling, the consumers actually generate their own plot and they tell their own story, where the consumer is the protagonist and the brand just offers a character to be incorporated into their own story. The good news here is that we kind of circumvent that problem we had where we have like image-based content, but we need to kind of tell a plot. And it's hard to do this with a single image. Like when the consumer is a protagonist, he or she kind of tells their own story, generates their own plot, and then the image content we have just helps them to kind of incorporate a different character, your brand as a character in this plot. And then obviously that not only makes that your brand more relevant to consumer, but also potentially makes that consumer share content about their brand in order to express themselves and tell their own story. Once we kind of focused in on this idea of the consumer being the protagonist and the brand being like a supporting actor, that's where we go into archetypes. Archetypes, as you can see on the next slide, those are inherent patterns of psychological structures in our minds. Often they were completely unconscious. We're not kind of running around and saying like, hey, I'm a jester, hey, I'm a magician, or stuff like this. But like we see it and implicitly it makes sense for us. It's been a very long history of thought behind this. It was developed by Jung a German Austrian psychologist in the 19th century. And it has been also used a lot in branding, with the idea of like the brand can use archetypes in order to resonate more with customers. And that's how we, as you can see on the next slide, we use archetypes. Using archetypes to tell stories, we kind of reframe storytelling from like, I tell the brand stories, to like, I offer my brand as a resource for consumers to build their own plot for their own story. The brand becomes a supporting actor, not the protagonist, that enables then the actual protagonist, the consumer, to tell their own story and to reach their own goals, consciousness goals or unconscious goals. Much of the archetype stuff you probably heard about revolves around the plot archetype. We show you on the next slide the example of the hero's journey. So going back into Lord of the Rings, which is a great example, like Frodo is kind of in his everyday life, and then he's called to a challenge, to adventure. He's reluctant at first. He needs his mentor, like Gandalf. They go on this journey together. Frodo grows, has a crisis point, comes back victorious, transformed back into the normal life. It's a perfect hero's journey. That's what we call a plot archetype. And that's what most research on archetypes and most managerial practice that uses archetype has utilized. Again, for Instagram, that doesn't really fit, because Instagram is image-based and we have problems telling a whole plot archetype, which is again a sequential structure, in a single image. That's why on the next slide, we show you our lens, which is around character archetypes. Now, the cool thing about character archetypes is that you can actually express them in this one single image. You look at a still frame of Gandalf and you notice, well, that guy, that's a wizard. Or like in the terminology here, he's a magician, right? You look at like somebody who is dressed in rugged clothing and kind of has a cowboy hat on or something like this, and you're like, oh, that's an outlaw. You look into somebody who is kind of flying in a helicopter, well, that is a ruler. So like on the right-hand side here on that slide, you see the 12 different character archetype, which we mine from Mark and Pearson's work. And that's also where the handout comes in. So like, again, like in our handout, we describe all of those archetypes in great depth and also show you how you can execute those archetypes and use our structure here when creating your own content. Just to briefly kind of outline them, like there's the outlaw, magician, hero, lover, jester, everyman, caregiver, ruler, creator, innocent, sage, and the explorer. Like those are 12 archetypes that, even though we don't reflect on them often consciously, we still recognize them immediately when they're shown to us in movies, when they're described to us in literature, when we see them in a painting. Like all of those characters, they really immediately imprint on us and help us make sense of the world. And they also are used by consumers to describe themselves. Like if you listened or if you thought about yourself, like who are you really? You could use that framework here to really understand like what archetype do you claim for yourself? For your information, for myself, I claim the creator, the jester, and the explorer. I kind of a mix around those three archetypes. Now, our point here is that brands can use that 12 archetype framework to pick their own character archetype and then consistently express that archetype, because then I, as a consumer, I know exactly who you are as a brand. And I can use you as a resource in my own stories. You are like a supporting actor in my own movie I'm creating around for myself. I brought you one example, and it's going back into what Jacob showed you earlier with the helicopter. And Jacob showed you like, well, actually not the best post. And why is that? Let's dive a little bit deeper here with this helicopter on the next slide. It is the ruler archetype. And why is this? Because like the helicopter is something people fly around in when they're rich and famous and powerful, right? If you have a helicopter, please invite me. I would love to fly one. Right? But it's like what we associate with like billionaires and politicians and mega stars and stuff like this, right? Those are the rulers. Now, it would fit to your brand if you put yourself as a ruler archetype, right? If that is your brand, then that's great content. However, the brand that actually used that image in the Instagram aligns themselves with like helping others, with like charitable causes, being a team player. So based on their identity, the innocent or the caregiver archetype would be much, much better fit, but it's not expressed through this type of content. So you can see here our whole approach, where we reconceptualize what brand storytelling can be on Instagram, where we have the challenge that all of our 85% of our content is just image-based. So we ask ourselves, what is the identity of the brand? What archetype fits best the brand? Maybe the innocent, maybe the caregiver. And then how can we express this archetype consistently through our image-based content? And that's where the handout comes in and the way we kind of help you find these structural elements to design content. Now I give it over to Jacob. He will tell you more about the data we collected and the findings we have.
Okay, thanks, Jo. So this is how we sort of came to this idea. We first started by collecting data from Instagram accounts. We used 7 wine brands for this, and we took 1 year's worth of Instagram posts from each one. That ended up being 1,244 posts altogether, so quite an extensive data set. But what allowed us to dig even deeper into this was to interview a representative from each of these 7 brands. We also interviewed 3 professional social media storytellers. And this really allowed us to look into sort of the decisions that go into both making the content and then deciding to post the content. We also used the company website just to give a little bit of background on the brands. So once we had the images, the first step was to identify what was the dominant archetype in each post. And so we used those 12 archetypes from Mark and Pearson that we highlighted earlier. Now it's important to note that an image can align with several different archetypes depending on your perspective. But we selected the one that seemed the most dominant to us. To sort of walk you through how that looked, here's an example of how we assign the archetypes. So we'll start with the picture in the top left corner. We see here a creator picture. Now, why is it the creator? The creator wants to make something of enduring value. You know, they value hard work and innovation. So what we see here is somebody inside a tank cleaning it, obviously getting ready to receive more wine or depending on what they're doing. Then the picture right next to it, 227 there, this we classified as an innocent archetype. But hang on a second, you could look at this and say, well, there's 2 people sitting there, they're both drinking wine. Why isn't this a lover post? A lover post would most likely have the 2 people might be locking eyes together. We might have a closer perspective, like the camera kind of zoomed in closer on them. But what we have instead is their backs are turned to the camera. They're looking out sort of towards this beautiful landscape. And that really aligns with the innocent archetype. The innocent archetype is all about experiencing paradise and sort of being worry-free and living a simple life. And so that's kind of what we see in this image. And likewise, you can go through some of these other pictures and see sort of why we coded them this way, like the pictures that include bees. Bees obviously being a symbol of nature. So it makes a lot of sense to use the innocent archetype. Or the dog swimming in the little pool there. That's obviously kind of a cute picture, also aligns with the innocent archetype. So you can see sort of how we came to these conclusions. We ended up with multiple different categories of posts for our data set. The first were those that expressed archetypes. And our criteria for this was that they should be kind of quickly identified by somebody who doesn't really have any knowledge of archetypes. Remember that archetypes are sort of a subconscious thing. So if it's not readily identifiable, then it's kind of might be a stretch to call it an archetype post. That meant that there were also posts that were non-archetype. So these ones did not express any archetypes at all. They tended to be like just a simple bottle shot or some kind of winery promotion or public service announcement, that kind of thing. When we collected this data, this was during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we wanted to sort of minimize the influence of the pandemic on our results. So any post that was explicitly about the pandemic, we decided to exclude into its own separate category. And so what we ended up with was this, where you can see some of the different archetypes that we came across. Notice that there was an other archetype category in the green. These were any archetypes that made up 5% or less of the brand. So they weren't really significant enough to have their own category. So the most important thing here is that we noticed that there were two different sort of camps. On one end, we had well-articulated brands. They were characterized by having a large percentage of lead archetypes. So you see that in the pie charts here, the red is the lead archetype section. The well-articulated brands have quite a bit. Whereas if you look at the poorly articulated brands, these were ones that had a really large section of non-archetype posts. And so we found this really interesting to sort of dig deeper into and see what was going on here. So first, let's look at the difference between the lead archetypes of these brands. So again, on the top, we have the well-articulated brands, and the bottom are the poorly articulated ones. You see with the well-articulated brands, an average of 49% of their posts were in their lead archetype category. Poorly articulated brands, it was 22% on average. So that means that the well-articulated brands had 2.2 times more posts in their lead archetype category. So definitely a little bit more defined. Then if we look at comparing the non-archetype category, the well-articulated brands had 12% on average, so a pretty small share of their total posts, whereas the poorly articulated brands had 36% on average. That's 3 times more than you saw with the well-articulated brands. So definitely a contributing factor. Then another thing you can compare is the lead archetype versus the next highest archetype, or the runner-up archetype. And this also helped us sort of see how well-defined these brands were. The well-defined brands had a 4 times difference between these two categories, and the poorly defined brands had a 1.3 times difference. So that means the well-articulated brands had 3 times more in their lead archetype compared to their runner-up archetype. So let's look at some specific examples. First, we'll start here with the brand in the well-articulated category. So we have here a sort of snippet from their winery website, and there are 2 archetypes that emerge from this quote here. We see here, we can truly say that each bottle of wine we make is a product of our family's passion. That really does speak to the creator archetype. Whereas we see at the end here, we consider each person that enjoys a glass of our wine to be a part of our family. Very much the caregiver archetype coming through here. Now, how do these 2 archetypes manifest in their actual brand, in their Instagram posts? Well, we can see 2 examples right here. On the left, we have an example of a creator post. Why is it a creator post? Well, you see, obviously, somebody here is paying attention to a task they're doing in the winery. There's hoses scattered across the floor. You know, it really looks like they're working. And then on the right, we have a caregiver posts where you see, you know, somebody enjoying a glass of wine. They have a blanket. They're eating grapes. They're reading a book. Very sort of, the wine is almost acting as sort of a caregiver to them. Now, this works nicely for the brand because the caregiver is their dominant archetype, and then the creator is their second most dominant archetype. So we can see how their brand story connects directly with their 2 biggest archetypes. Now, on the other hand, let's look at one of the poorly defined or poorly articulated brands. You can see a couple different archetypes in their brand story. Translating a time and place into liquid, again, another creator reference. And then stripping away all the fancy buildings and high-tech equipment. You're left with a place on this earth that grows wine unlike any other. That has a very sort of innocent feel to it, where it's not about the fancy stuff. It's more about sort of the simple life. So how does this tie into the posts in their brand? Well, here we see on the top right, you see an example of an innocent post. So you can see the family, you know, they made a fort out of wine cases, kind of a cute picture, very connected to the innocent archetype. And just below that, we see the creator archetype, somebody in the cellar, taking a sample from a barrel, checking to see the quality. You can see them inspecting the wine, sort of leaned up against the barrels, very much a creator post. So remember, in their brand story, innocent and creator were the sort of two biggest archetypes there. Well, they also make up their two biggest categories. The problem is that their largest archetype category was non-archetype. And that's what we see in the bottom left corner. And this is typically how a lot of these non-archetype posts looked, where it's just sort of a promotion for the brand. Now, it's very hard to totally eliminate these posts from a winery Instagram account, because ultimately you do have to promote yourself. You do have to kind of make these posts. But there must be a way to sort of convert these non-archetype posts into archetype posts. Then on the top left here, we see that post of the McLaren in it that we talked about earlier. So now you see why this doesn't really fit their brand story. That picture aligns with the ruler archetype, which only makes 0.5% of their brand. Actually, that was the only picture on their account that had that archetype. So you can see now why that was sort of an outlier for this particular brand. So going back to removing some of these non-archetype posts and converting them into an archetype post. Here we have a perfect example. Both of these posts are made for the same purpose. Each of these wines got some critical acclaim or won an award, and so the winery is trying to promote it. Now, for brand Y on the left here, you see that we have the quote, or sorry, the review that they got overlaid on top of a bottle shot. So there isn't really too much going on here, but on the right, we see that this brand posted their bottle on a shelf with a book and some plant there. You might be thinking, though, you don't really see the award. Well, in this case, they put the award that they won is in the caption of the post, but the image itself, if you're just scrolling through Instagram, connects with this brand's dominant archetype, which is the regular guy. You can see it makes up 40% or 48% of their entire brand. And it makes sense, right? You know, this is like somebody drinking wine at their home. You know, they put the bottle on the shelf with the books that they like. The cork is put back in the bottle, almost like you were drinking at home. And so this is why you see this brand has such a small percentage of non-archetype posts. Going back to brand Y over here, we can see that they chose to sort of do the more simple approach and end up being a non-archetype post, but the magician archetype is their main one. So they could have used an image that sort of more closely aligned with the magician archetype. It still would convey the message, but it would actually show a little bit more into their lead archetype. So really what we've done here is we've come up with 3 different steps to cohesively tell your brand story. First, you have to choose the character archetype that best fits your brand. Then you have to find a way to consistently express that in your content. And that's done through strategic elements, which is what you find in the handout that we've provided for you. And then, like we went over in the last example, you want to look for opportunities to transform those non-archetype posts into archetype posts to give your brand a better definition. So this answers sort of the question as to how to tell stories without a sequential plot. But for the next question, I'm going to hand things back over to Yo, and he will go through that.
Thank you. Let's recap for a moment, right? So like the problem about storytelling on Instagram is it doesn't, like a sequential plot lines are hard to express via a single image. That's why it's maybe the best approach to say, like, this is us as a brand. We kind of find that archetype and then consistently express it over time, limiting non-archetypal posts and other archetypes that are not us. For example, by, well, what Jacob just showed you, showing you showing you information about the award you just won for your wine, but overlaying the same content that describes like the review like the text, overlaying it over an image that actually expresses your archetype. So the next question here is, how do I know how do I consistently know what image I should post? And here we want to offer you a first step, a new step number 1 in how you select content. And we brought a framework with us, and it's quite complex, but like I walk you through it step by step. So the framework is best read like in the yellow part first. And to some extent, this is not great news for you, right? So like in the middle here, you post content and then you kind of measure the response. And then obviously that determines like, will you post similar content in the future? So like this posting the content, measuring the response, and then kind of fine tuning their approach based on the customer feedback, like your engagement rates, etc. Marketing 101, let's not spend too much time on it. I brought you one quote though to kind of check out. And this is about a brand that kind of has an owner has a Bernedoodle puppy, and they took some video of that, and you can see here how they write. We kind of posted it first as a story, immediately got some cool responses, and that made us decide, yeah, we want to post that one because there was this instant response, and instantly said, I have to put this video on the feed. For some reason, it was resonating. Now, the important part here really is the for some reason, because this is where the first new step really kind of begins. Before you kind of think about like what content will you post, we want to first think about how do we identify opportunities for content. And that's where in our framework, you see like the most action happens here on this horizontal line on the top. So identifying potential content or content opportunities, that is the first step we want to add to your content creation process. Now, what do we mean by content opportunities? There's always going to be more content to post than what you actually post for 2 reasons, and that's on the next slide. There's like the more organized, more deliberate approach to content opportunities, creating content opportunities. And this is, let's say, for example, you plan a photo shoot. Now you're going to take 100, 200 pictures on that photo shoot, but you end up using maybe 10, 15, 20 pictures of that, right? So you have a big pool of pictures and you use a select part of it. And that comes down to like then the content selection, or what do you want to post based on the metrics you kind of measure. So that's when you are back in the normal day-to-day. We want you to start thinking about the opportunities up front. Like, how do we organize the photo shoot? That's the question we're asking here, right? Are you taking photos inside or outside? If you're going outside, do you want to create this photo shoot at a beach, at a lake, like in the vineyard, in somebody's, or like at somebody's, like what would be now in the playground? I don't know, that's a bad example, but you know where I'm getting this, right? So where's the location we want to go? What do people do there, right? Are they just drinking? Are they eating? Are they just hanging out? Are they playing instruments? Let's say, for example, you want to do a photo shoot of people eating. Like, what does the dinner look like? Is it like super formal, or is it more like informal? Is it like a buffet, or is it a picnic? Like, all of those decisions need to be made before you actually get the models into your location, because you have to pack the things, you have to scout the location. Like, those are the things you do in order to create opportunities to content, to design that photo shoot that results in like way more pictures than you will use for what you actually post. So that's especially maybe when you operate with higher budget, like how do you organize the opportunities? How do you structure the photo shoot? How do you plan it? What strategic elements do you want to have in that? But it also happens in a more implicit way. So like imagine like you're awake for 18 hours, 16 hours a day. Let's say 16 hours because sleep is important, right? And every hour has like 60 minutes and every minute has like 60 seconds. And maybe every 10 seconds or so, you orient your gaze towards something new. Like you see a new scene or something happens around you. And that's probably a very conservative estimate, right? But even if you just every 10 seconds, every 10, 12 seconds, you see something new, you notice something new, that's about like 5,000 to 6,000 instances where you could take a picture, right? You see something, is this something that is important for your brand? Is that important for your brand, right? So like there's constant things going on around you, and you have to kind of filter through what could be an important and resonating and relevant image for my brand that I want to take the picture and then maybe decide to post it later. So that is this implicit approach. And also there, you have to kind of know what strategic elements are you looking for in order to evaluate all of those different small moments happening around you, whether or not they can help you to express your archetype in consistent ways. Now, on the next slide, I brought a quote here. And you can see that this is really coming from like this implicit kind of approach, but it's still very strategic. That person actually says you have to be very strategic. But that person was very strategic in the moment. They were just driving into work yesterday. They didn't have their camera on them, but they saw those two birds standing there at the lake. And you recognize that image. Jacob showed you this earlier in our quiz. And our informant here says they were just standing there. You can see how unplanned this was, but that person knows their brand and recognized the opportunity. I took a photo, I posted it because it was the first time I saw those two together at the pond. The lovebirds are back. And it's kind of created the sense of inspiration and hope. Love is in the air. So they realize that those two lovebirds are a strategic element to express their lead archetype, which is the innocent, which also ties back into their brand. Now, going back into our framework here on the next slide, you can see that we are adding like this top end to it. Before you start thinking about like, this is the content I post and then I monitor for engagement rates, we want you to really start thinking first about like, what are the opportunities for content, either deliberatively planned or just in the moment realized. And for that, like the best approach you can do is the blue one here on the left side, like being a brand-driven approach to like identifying content opportunities or planning them. In our next example here, we show you 6 images from a brand that is fitting into this well-articulated bucket of our data set. And again, you as a brand, you want to be in this well-articulated bucket as well, because then I, as a consumer, I really understand who you are as a brand. You consistently demonstrate to me who you are, and that helps me to kind of use you as a resource to tell my own story. We looked over that Instagram account, and then we talked to the social media manager of that brand. And we said, we noticed a lot of the posts that kind of show wine served in non-conventional wine glasses. What is this about? And the social media manager responded, that's something when building the brand we were very thoughtful about. We wanted to make this a wine for everybody. And wine, like a lot of times, has been very posh, and you don't, or you feel like an outsider if you don't know enough. And so we wanted to have it very inviting and non-pretentious. So you see our model evolving here, right? The brand has a certain goal, a certain identity they want to convey. They want to be inviting and non-pretentious as a differentiating point from other wines. You find the right archetype that fits you. In their case, it's the regular guy. And then the next question is, how do you consistently express that archetype through those single images? What strategic elements can you use to express the regular guy? In this case, strange wine glass or non-conventional wine glasses. We have like mason jars in the first picture. We have like these high water glasses in the second one. We have very like artistic, old school looking crystal glasses, right? We have a lot of different glasses. We have other things like in the third picture, like the wine spill. That is a planned strategic element that the marketing manager kind of incorporated into her pictures. All of those elements, like, for example, the clothing as well, and the locations where they hang out and how they kind of relate to each other. All of those kind of are strategic elements to reinforce the character archetype that is dominant for the brand, the regular guy, which aligns with the identity of what the brand wants to be, inviting and non-pretentious. On the next slide, you see how this nicely ties into our model. The brand-driven way to identify content opportunities really thinks about first the brand, what archetype do we want to express, and then looks into what are the different elements, strategic elements we want to have in our pictures, and then either plan the photo shoot accordingly or have this in the back of their head while they're working through their daily lives and just seeing somebody in the winery who's maybe dressed like the perfect regular guy, or like seeing some scene in the winery where they have like a wine spill, or like seeing somebody bringing their favorite camping mug with them and drinking wine from that. Like those are the moments you want to grasp the opportunity. On the right-hand side in this frame here, you see like the green path that is more customer oriented. This is the one which is not exclusively used, but more often than not used by those brands who are poorly articulating their brand archetype. And we brought another quote for this as well. So this one is early on in the pandemic, and the content creator here was thinking, oh my God, like I was thinking how people felt at that time. I was like, what the hell is happening? The kids are home. I don't know what to do. We're pulling out our hair, right? And so the idea was here that this would be content that resonates with the others, with our customers, because they're going through the same pandemic like we are, and they're all sitting at home with their kids and they don't know what they do. But in our framework, you can see that this is like this consumer-oriented view, which is based on anticipating a certain response in our framework here, this slide, which anticipates a certain response by the consumer and then selecting or then kind of creating content opportunities based on what they think will resonate with the consumer. The problem with this is that the brand has no space in this. Like it's actually the very same process being used here to kind of identify opportunities for content and then selecting content. In each case, the only decision criteria is the customer response, either like anticipating it, what will resonate with customers right now, or like seeing the actual response and the metrics and then fine-tuning your content over time. That creates a feedback loop. Like all the time, you're just thinking about the customer. And yes, you are told all the time to think about your customer. We're not saying anything else. We also say think about the customer, but only in the second and third step of that yellow process. When you're posting content and you look at the customer response, and then you're finding what is the best content out of your pool of available content up here, there you think about the customer. But if you really create a strong and consistent brand with a consistent character archetype, in order to really do this, you need to have this first step of identifying content opportunities, which should be solely based around your brand and how it expresses or how it incorporates these strategic components that express your content, a character archetype. Okay, so brand story of the brand, or like identity of the brand, fitting it into a character archetype that fits, and then using these strategic elements to consistently express it based on like the framework, for example, we developed, which you can download in our handout. For the last bit of our presentation, I give it back to Jacob to kind of talk you through the next couple of steps for your brand.
Thanks, Jo. Basically, we wanted to leave you with an action plan that you can use to sort of be in charge of your brand story. And it reiterates those 3 points that we've mentioned a couple times. Choosing an archetype for your brand, consistently expressing it, and then creating and identifying content opportunities based on that archetype that you chose. So we developed a framework to sort of go through that you can use to help your brand story. And I'll walk you through sort of how this would work. So first it starts in the blue section with the Archetype Audit. So this is where you would do basically what we did for this, this research. You could look at the Instagram posts of your brand and your competitors, and sort of see what archetypes are most prominent. And you can see where you stack up. Are you a well-articulated brand? Are you a poorly articulated brand? What is your lead archetype? What are your competitors' lead archetypes? And you can kind of go from there. You can look at, within your own brand, you can look at, what posts, what archetypes that are already on my Instagram give the most consumer engagement. Maybe that's a factor, because you might realize that maybe the archetype that you're expressing doesn't fit your brand story, or the other way around. You like the archetype that your images are using, but maybe your story doesn't align with them. The nice thing about a story, or even images for that matter, is that they can be changed. So you're not necessarily set in stone to what you have already, and you can kind of work from there. So once you sort of have your archetype and you want to consistently express it, then you can look at the structural elements framework. And this is the handout that we've provided for you. So you can use these elements that directly relate to specific archetypes, and you can use those in your images to express that archetype consistently. So here's just a little sort of snapshot from the handout. If you haven't downloaded it already, it's at epicbrandstorytelling.com. And you can see that we've gone through each archetype separately and basically done this. So we outlined sort of the profile, the values and desires of the archetype, and then different things you can use in the images: symbols, settings, actions, various elements. So you can see, like in these 4 examples here, we're using the sage archetype, and you can see we've selected 4 images. Each of these images is from a different brand, but if you took away the brand, these all express the sage archetype based on the elements that are in there. And again, that's available for download. So yeah, I guess I will turn it over to you guys now. This is the first time we've presented this, so if you have any feedback, we would love to hear from you. Or if you have any questions, or you want to discuss how you can apply this to your own brand, you can reach us at info@epicbrandstorytelling.com. And thanks, everyone. Great presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Really appreciate that information. It's fascinating to me how much thought goes into deciding, and choosing how a strategy should work on any social media, but especially on Instagram, because it's so image based. And we're fortunate at Brock that we have a fantastic social media coordinator and who works with a lot of different areas on campus. And I know that Leighton, I'll say her name, Leighton Risto. She's very, very good at deciding these sorts of things. Because it really is so strategic and so much thought has to go into it. So we have a couple of questions. The first is just how much does this change? So if you gave this presentation, say a year ago, which I know you have done this presentation before, and as you look sort of toward the future, how much do you think things evolve, or how quickly do these decisions evolve?
In terms of the archetypes, not at all. Like those are very old. Like the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest archetypes, oldest stories we have, and you could identify archetypes in there. I mean, like the whole idea by Jung, the psychologist from the 19th century, who first worked on this, was that those are stable across different cultures in our civilization. You find them in the different nations, you find them on different continents, right? So they're very, very, very stable. Where it does change is, what is your category? So like we're talking to winemakers right now, and wine marketers. And this is where we develop that framework in. And like this information, like the 40 pages of handout of how to express an archetype, they're specifically designed for the wine context. Now, if you wanted to kind of take this into, let's say, a fashion context or a car context, that would be different, right? It would have to be adjusted based on what is your product. Sometimes more, sometimes less. I mean, I'm waging a guess here that if you were like doing spirits, right? If you're working on whiskey, or if you're doing like craft sodas, that would also probably hold true. But if you have a category which is very different, then you probably want to localize this framework into your own context. But the archetypes themselves, very stable for centuries or millennia.
And actually, yeah, I think you may have just answered another question that I was going to ask, which is, I know that we have people, watching this lecture series who do come from, say, the cider end of things, or craft brewing and different things like that. So it sounds like it is transferable, a lot of this information, and of course those archetypes. There's that transfer that works across different parts of this sector, but maybe not other sectors, for example.
Exactly that, yeah. Like I do think without having it tested, I would say like it would apply to craft breweries without a problem. It really becomes more of a problem when like the whole product category changed drastically.
Right, that makes sense. Another question here is, in a well-articulated brand, what percentage of posts should be targeted to their archetypes? So is 49% enough? Or should you kind of go over that majority?
Well, I think it's a really good start to have it at such a high percentage, but I think really sort of the sky's the limit in terms of how articulated you can make your brand. Some of the brands that since doing this project, some of the brands that I've seen on Instagram, global wine brands, you notice how really finely tuned they are. And I bet if we were to do an audit on those brands, their lead archetype would be maybe not 100%, but it would be pretty close, just based on their Instagram accounts.
And,
yeah,
that's building on this a little bit more, like I think having 100% just one archetype, that's probably unnecessary, because like maybe there's like a secondary archetype that you want to emphasize, right? Maybe you want to be like one of the brands we showed have like most of their archetypes or most of the posts on the caregiver side, but they have some like shadow of the creator, for example. And that's perfectly fine. I think one of the biggest things brands should look into is to eliminate non-archetype posts, right? So like what Jacob showed you between brand Y and brand D, like brand D had 6% non-archetype and brand Y had 41% archetype, right? So if you shifted 35% of your posts into your lead archetype, that would help quite a bit right away.
Very interesting. And then just the last question, as you sort of look toward the future, and as you say that the archetypes don't really change, do you think that those same archetypes could apply to other social media platforms? And I know that in this case you're talking specifically about Instagram, but is this information transferable to, say, Facebook? Twitter is a bit different, and of course the video platforms are a bit different. But would you say it's transferable?
I do think so. I mean, like at the end of the day, it always depends on like the platform you're looking at, right? And Facebook and Twitter, very image-based, I would say. Facebook a little bit less because there usually is more text associated with it. Twitter is big for like meme marketing as well, and posting images. So I would say a brand that uses Twitter, even though maybe it's not the first choice, but if they use it already, I think that would hold up. The key difference would be, is it more like an image-based network, or like YouTube, where it's definitely video, right? TikTok, I would also kind of consider a video-based network, right? And so there, maybe another strategy is necessary. I'm talking about augmented reality a lot, and there you could also tell about like how do we tell stories. Well, and this is a more immersive medium, and there we need to have a new storytelling approach. I think what we are saying here is that brand storytelling is one of the key marketing ideas for marketers to kind of promote their brands. But brand storytelling needs to be adjusted based on the channel you're working on and how the channel is set up. And that's why we think whenever you have like a channel that is very image-based, it translates into the images you have on your web page. It translates on the images you hang up in your binary, right? So like whenever you're dealing with like an image-based channel, then those would translate to other social media platforms or other marketing channels as well.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, I think those are all the questions that we have. So again, I just want to say thank you very much to Professor Joachim Scholz and Jacob Gigliotti for giving us this really interesting look into this world of wine marketing on Instagram. As with all of these COVI lecture series talks, this one will be uploaded and added to the COVI website in the next few days. You can find that at brocku.ca/COVI. Of course, this series continues right away next week. We have on Monday, March 14th, we have Liette Vasseur, who is the UNESCO Chair on Community Sustainability from Local to Global here at Brock University. And her topic is exploring different cover crops to adapt to climate change. Beyond that, on March 21st, we have another really exciting presentation, this one from Vanda Privado, Chief Marketing and Digital Officer of the LCBO, along with Abe Garge, who's the Vice President of Merchandising for the LCBO. So we're really excited about that one as well. And then on Monday, March 28th, Belinda Kemp, who is a senior enologist here with COVI, will be giving a presentation titled Magic of Mushrooms, the potential use of mushroom-derived materials in the winery. So 3 fantastic lectures coming up here to close out the 2022 COVI lecture series. So with that, I'll say thank you very much once again. We look forward to having you next week, and please visit brocku.ca/COVI for all the videos and, of course, all your COVI news. Thank you. Bye-bye.